Hello and welcome to another Zoom meeting and podcast of Here's Tom with the Weather, where we investigate the plethora of higher powers that populate the vast universe of 12-step recovery, where alcoholics riff out on step 3 and step 11 as prescribed by the founders of AA, who encourage us to find some kind of higher power as long as it's not us. And we speak to people with all manner of higher powers, from those who might be atheists, Sufis, agnostics, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, followers of Islam, Hermetics, paganists, non-duality. We leave no stone unturned. It's our aim to promote understanding and open-mindedness so that alcoholics and addicts can find a higher power of their own to stay sober and carry that message. We promote tolerance and empathy for folks who might just have different spiritual practices than us. It's all about live and let live. And please remember right at the start that this is not an AA meeting or an NA meeting. It's just a Q&A where we discuss some people's version of their higher power, whatever that may be. Sometimes we speak to seekers, to gurus, and people not necessarily in recovery. But today we're speaking to Jeffrey Cosker. Hey, Jeffrey, how you doing, mate?
Very good. How are you?
Good. So I've got a short bio here that I took off one of Jeff's pieces of literature. And it goes like this. Having had revelatory and mystical experiences as a result of total devotion to a 12-step program and then to A Course in Miracles, Jeffrey's faith is grounded deep. His experiences in life, lightheartedness, and total commitment to awakening allow people from all different backgrounds to experience and safety to open up with him. With a deep passion for mind training, strong focus, and determination to see things differently, Jeffrey demonstrates the transformation that happens when your life turns over to a higher purpose. After spending 4 years in a devoted spiritual community, Jeffrey heard the guidance to start a prison ministry. He's recently started a non-profit in the state of Nevada with a purpose focused on the denial of guilt in all forms. He continues to share the message of forgiveness with prisoners all throughout the United States, and he's been practicing the 12 steps and been sober for several years. So that's a nice bio. So I want to start off, and I know there will be people here who are listening and who are here with us in Zoom, Jeffrey, who aren't familiar with A Course in Miracles. So I was wondering if you could just give us a bit of a quick background, a bit of some broad brushstrokes on what exactly is A Course in Miracles and who started it.
Sure. Oh, thank you, David. That intro was beautiful. I've never heard my bio read out loud, so that was nice too. But I love the way you start this meeting about the openness and willingness. That means a lot to me. Yeah, A Course in Miracles, I found it a year after I entered recovery of 12 steps. And to give you a little bit of a background, it was the answer to a prayer, really, for two people that worked together. It was two psychologists that were actually, they would call themselves atheists from Columbia University in New York. And in their department, it was Helen Schuckman and Bill Thetford. In the department they worked in, it was just anarchy. There was anger and gossip and criticism, and they just were not having a good life at the time. And so Helen went to Bill, who she didn't like very much either. And she said those famous words, Bill, there's got to be another way. And Bill responded very simply with, I know, and I'll help you find it. And that has become a really cool story to me, even with recovery as a background where two or more joined, there I am, And what happened after that was Helen went through some time of hearing an internal dictation of A Course in Miracles. And she heard, the first line she heard was, "This is A Course in Miracles. Please take notes." And so she was a little concerned when she heard that, and she went back to Bill and she's like, listen, I hear this inner dictation. So over the next 7 years, and this was in the 70s, her and Bill got together and they wrote it all down. And then one of their close friends, Ken Wapnick, who was one of the first teachers of A Course in Miracles, kind of edited it all and helped them put it out. And it was printed in June of 76. And from that point forward, yeah, the rest is history.
Wow. So we're talking about it's the mind of Jesus or the voice of Jesus. So
correct.
These people have channeled, if that's the right word, the mind of Christ and brought that back down, brought it and put it on paper. Is that more or less what we're talking about here?
Sure, it is written in the words of Jesus. So when you read the text, it uses words like Holy Spirit, but it's written from his perspective, from the mind of Christ. Yeah.
Okay.
And
And
three sections. So there's a text, and then a workbook, and then a manual for teachers. So it's three parts.
yes. And it's a day, just again, I'm just assuming that there's people in here who don't know what it is. It's a daily exercise, 365 days, where you go through and up to various stages of forgiveness. Is it more or less about forgiveness of oneself and forgiveness of others? Is that what we're talking about?
It is. It's about forgiveness. I mean, it's teaching the mind forgiveness and identification with the spirit in our mind, which the course calls right-mindedness. And so it's really an extended version of, you have the Serenity Prayer, which in its short form and its long form, and then you have the 164 pages of the big book, and then you have the Course in Miracles, which the text itself is 669 pages. The workbook is 488, but like you had said, it's designed to be done throughout the year, a lesson a day. You can take more than one day. The only instruction in the book is don't do more than one a day. That's the only instruction he gives, and do it to the best of your ability. He says that as well. And then there's a manual for teachers about some common questions, which is 92 pages at the very end of the book. And it looks like this.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you very much. So let's go back a little bit and let's talk a little bit about you. Who were you before you got sober and before you discovered the 12 steps? Can you give us a snapshot of how you got sober and what it was like, and how you discovered A Course in Miracles?
Absolutely, yeah. I got sober when I was 39 years old. And for, up until the day that I walked into a recovery center, I didn't have much background with spirituality or any of it. I literally was tied into the world. All my values were tied up in money, work, relationships with females and friends. And it was all about those types of things. I suffered from addiction and alcoholism for decades. I started off in my late teens, and it was a point in my life where I actually didn't even know how bad things were. And it was a friend of mine's son that kind of, as a typical addict, I had that belief that I'm not hurting anyone. I'm only hurting myself. That was my go-to.
Yeah.
Well, one day I went over to a friend's house, and I was teaching his kids how to play lacrosse. And if I was intoxicated or under the influence, and you didn't say don't drive, I would drive. But if you told me not to drive, I wouldn't argue. I'd be like, yeah, you're probably right, and I'd give you. I was at his house, and a friend of mine said, hey, give me the keys. I'll drive you home. I said, oh, no problem. I'll pick up the truck in the morning. So I left. The next day I stopped by his shop, and I said, hey, what's up? He goes, man, I had to deal. And this kid was 11 years old at the time. And he looked up to me, and I was, teaching him how to play lacrosse. And he goes, I had to put an 11-year-old to bed last night, and all he was doing was crying. And I was like, why? And when he said it to me, it was the first time I heard it. He goes, because I told him that you're sick. And I was like, excuse me? And he's like, that you have a problem. You can't stop when you drink or use drugs. And for whatever reason, that was the moment for me that I said, oh, wow, I could see, here's someone that I actually cared about, or was aware that I cared about. I cared about pretty much everyone, but I just was in denial. But with that moment, I kind of made a decision. Okay, I need to try to get some help for the first time in my life. I had tried things before, but it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because people told me I should. But after that moment, I went to my father, and it was my father who ultimately came to my house and found my briefcase with some things in it, and said, hey, you need to go into a facility to get help. And I said, okay. And this was right before Christmas, 2013. I said, I'll go after the holidays. It's the 21st. I got Christmas, New Year's, I got friends coming to town. And so he said, okay, because he didn't know anything about the disease either. And so he left my house, and I sat on the couch that night. And that was the first time I had heard the voice, what I call the spirit, speak to me. And it was pretty firm, actually. It said, you'll go tomorrow. And I was like, who said that? And so I called a friend of mine, And I said, where should I go? And he told me about a facility in the hills of Connecticut. And so the following day I went up there, and that's how it started for me. And
Just going to ask you about the voice that you heard. Just just an open question. There is, what was the voice? What did it sound like? Was it you, or was it like a commandment from heaven? What sort of voice are we talking about?
that was just something that shook me from where my mind was at, and it clearly wasn't me. I was so identified with the egoic voice at that point that it
Right.
was something outside of the realm of my awareness, that it was like, and it felt like it was outside, like behind me or something. It didn't sound like me that time. And I was like, I just knew it wasn't coming from my thought process. And at the time, I had no basis or understanding what it was, but I thought maybe I should probably listen to this. And so I made the phone call, and then I entered into the facility, the 12-step facility, where I read the big book as written by Bill Wilson, a fourth edition. And from the moment I read that book, I had started to have a shift. I was ready. I was ready at that time. And the book tells us, once these drastic and revolutionary proposals are accepted, sometimes an effect is felt at once. And that's what it was for me. I started to feel the effects. And it was 2 weeks that I was in the facility. I had done a 4-step, and I started working the steps as they're laid out in the big book. And then I had a profound experience like Bill Wilson did. That was shortly followed by a revelatory experience where this whole world disappeared, which was quite shocking at the time. And I didn't find out until later, where it actually explains what that is in A Course in Miracles in the first chapter. And it wasn't for another year. I actually had some relationships to mend before I was even ready to open up the book, A Course in Miracles. I had a deep prayer in my heart, but it showed up about a year later, after, and I actually went back and I did all the things they tell you in, the 12-step groups, do everything they tell you. And I went to my first sponsor and I said, I'll do everything you say. And then he's like, well, where are you living? I said, well, right now I'm staying at my parents' house because my floors are getting sanded. He goes, that feels good. I think you should stay there for 6 months. I was like, after I told him I'd do anything he said. And so then I did. But now I look back, and those 6 months I repaired those relationships to such a depth that, the trust had been completely gone. But when I was in front of them and they saw the things I was doing and willing to do each day, it launched me onto a program of recovery that I couldn't have done by myself. I certainly wouldn't have had that idea. So, yeah, and
Wow.
so I found the
Just,
course.
and just before we go on to how you came across A Course in Miracles, what was the profound spiritual experience? And you said, I think what you said was this world disappeared.
Yeah, that
Can you
was
explain what that means?
sure. Well, it was a lead up. In the big book it says on 62 with the third step, when we make that prayer, it also says there, if honestly and humbly made, a profound effect is felt at once. And this is what I believe Bill Wilson experienced. And there's a few other stories in the big book about, the waves flooding over me with the atheist and so forth. I think that's on 55. But from my experience, I was there and I started to do, I did a workshop on the 4-step. And so now here's someone who was a victim of the world their whole life. So,
Sure.
I actually took a little notepad and did my 4-step prior to going to the workshop. I'm like, let me get this hammered out here. And I only hate myself, the classics. Well, maybe I have a little bit of resentment towards my father, who is literally my biggest lesson in this lifetime up till now. And so I kind of wrote these notes, but when I went in there, this guy just spoke to me. His name was Big Book Bill, and he just spoke to me, and he started to explain the process of the 4-step, and I was just like, my hand just kept shooting up, like, wait a minute, everybody goes in the first column, and he's like, just nodding, and like it just started to dawn on my mind. And then when he was showing me that it all returns back to self, I was like, and I hadn't even a full understanding of the whole process yet. It's just the way it kind of went for me. And when I was in that room, there was a woman there who said, and he shared that there's no justified resentments. And I was like, wow. And so there was a woman there, says, I have one. And she raised her hand and she had been sexually abused. And he said, well, and he was trying to walk her through the process by which he knew to walk her through it. And she got very angry and she got up and left the facility. I never heard from her. I didn't know who she was. So I always looked at that like, oh my God, that was the reliving, the refeeling.
Mm.
And I said, I really need to look at these pretty deeply. And so that day I actually went into all my resentments, and I was able to bring them back. I was able to see what I was doing with my mind and projecting these things out. For whatever reason, it all just kind of made sense to me in that room. And I didn't even know what an alcoholic was yet. Literally. It was the next day at a family orientation where this woman actually spoke to the crowd. My parents were there. So my parents were flanking me, and I sat there, and she started to explain, addiction and drug addiction and alcoholism and this. And I always actually thought that I could control certain aspects of my drinking and drugging. And so that was what it was for me, this idea of choice. And so in that meeting, when she actually started to explain it, one part that just brought my guard down was she said every alcohol. So I thought it was different, drugs and alcohol, in my mind, it was always, this and that. And she said, every alcoholic and addict has one thing in common. And I remember listening to my voice in my head. It was like, come on, what's she talking about? In my head. And she throws a slide up, and the slide was a pencil drawing of a man with his hands in his face. And it just said, I'm not enough. And my guard was down enough at that point where that arrow got in and it just hit me in the heart. And I was like, oh my God, this is what it's all covering. This is what it's all been about. And so then when she started to explain it and the idea of choice, when I was able to accept in that room that I didn't have a choice, that's where forgiveness started to happen for me, because now I had already looked at it was all my part in the fourth step. But then when I saw, wait, if I wasn't choosing, that means there's no guilt. I let go of the guilt with choice. And so I started to have an experience in that room. It was the following day that I had an awakening where she actually was reading the steps. And when she went through the steps, she read them. And when she read the 12th step, I was sitting there, I was holding my parents' hands as they were reading the steps. And I said, everything's going to be okay. And I meant it for the first time in my life. And my father's not a hand holder. Let me just tell you that right now.
Okay.
So I'm sitting there doing this. And when she read the 12th step, I just had this, this complete catharsis, this energy just rushed through my body, and I just started to bawl. I mean, when I felt innocence, there was no other response but to weep. And I just wept. And for me, looking back, I think I was given purpose in that moment, because the 12th step talks about purpose. And I thought I had no purpose in my life. And when that was restored to my mind, I was like, oh, it wasn't all for nothing. It was as if all the promises came true in an instant for me. And, the following 4 hours, I was walking around this treatment center, what I call the Eckhart Tolle experience, where I'm just looking at everything for the first time. I'm humming from this place because there's no obstacles now in the way, at least for me at that moment. And I'm looking at things, and, it actually was snowing. It was in the winter. And it was a complete mystical experience. It wasn't until later that evening that I went back to my bedroom, and feeling this raised awareness and just vibration of God, of spirit rushing through me. I sat in my bed, and I continued to weep, and I made, in my own words, the third step prayer. I said, God, whatever you'll have me do in this life, so be it. If you want me to give up my life, and at the time I said for these people, and I meant for alcoholics and addicts and people suffering from addiction, I said, so be it. And when I said those words, that's when, if honestly, humbly made, it was the perfect storm for me. It's as if there's no explanation, but it's as if it emanated from my heart, and just the world disappeared, and the great rays, and it's very personal. So there's no way to transmit what happened after that, but it was yeah, the reawakening of
To coin that kind of cliche, you went from your head to your heart. I would sound like, and you surrendered. Okay, that's wonderful.
Sure.
So fast forward a bit. When did A Course in Miracles happen, and what happened then? Did you have another awakening similar?
It wasn't similar to that. It was more just, so now with this type of I never went back to work. I left work on that Friday before recovery. I never went back to work again. I never returned to my old life. I lived with my parents for a while, but I threw myself into recovery. And at the time that this a gentleman showed up, and so it was just coincidences, the coincidence, it was just nonstop. It was miracle after miracle for me, that just kind of my mind was opening. And I was actually at a meeting. I just wrote about this yesterday. I was at a meeting, and this guy walks in, and as soon as he walks in, my heart was like, ooh. I was like, who is this guy? He shared, and I just felt every word. So I walked up to him after he actually got out of prison that day, and he walked into that room. He later became a very close friend of mine who I just flew back to see in the East. And in our discussion, he asked me, he said, hey, you ever study A Course in Miracles? I said, no, but I just was looking it up literally that morning, another coincidence. And he said, oh, maybe we'll get together and read it. So him and I started reading it together. And within 2 weeks, I started to read it, and I read a few accompanying books that go with it. I looked up a few of the teachers that are known in the world, and there was a conference in New York City, and I was in Connecticut. So I went down there, and I met who was to become my teacher, that I went to his spiritual community that week. So it was very rapid. It was very rapid.
Wow, that's just amazing. Thank you very much. And just you obviously as you said in your bio, you do you're doing prison ministry now. Can you tell us how that you went on you went in a spiritual um, camp for 4 years? Is that right? You went away, and you sort of you went and found yourself more. You delved into it more for 4 years. Where was that, and how did that go?
I did. So after my that main experience that I had, and following experiences, they weren't lasting. Like the big book says, they don't last unless followed by strenuous strenuous action. So some of those beliefs and obstacles did return for me. I didn't stay in that fully, like even Eckhart stayed for 3 months and then had to reintegrate to the world. I actually had to still do some work on some things. I mean, I never had a desire for certain things, fell away and they were gone, but certain things came back. My desire to be intimate with a female, those types of things. I still had to work on a lot of those things. So I was practicing the best I could within the 12 steps. And I just had a deeper desire to go into my mind and actually face some of the deeper guilt and things that I had. And so what showed up with this gentleman, David Hofmeister, at this
Mm.
retreat. And when I met David, he just was speaking. And it was the same thing when I met this guy, John. I was like, wait, there's something about this guy. And when I connected with him, he was just like, hey, I'm going to my parent in Ohio. Why don't you come out? And he was flying off to Spain the next day. So it was 6 weeks later that I ended up going out to a monastery that he has in Utah. And I went out there for a devotional stay. And once I went, I ended up staying. I mean, I went back to take care of some affairs, but I ended up staying. In the devotional center is really just people that are 24 hours a day devoted to healing their minds. And whatever comes up, we just face it and we don't run away, whether it's my father issues or my mother issues or whatever. In that safe environment, there's an allowance for those things to move through. So I spent 4 years doing that. And then I was with him. Actually, I would travel with him around the world. And we were in San Francisco at a Course in Miracles conference run by the Community Miracles Center. And I started to hear again this voice that said prison ministry in my mind, and I just didn't know. And I shared it with David, and then actually the same thing. Reflections started walking up, telling me there was a gentleman, Joe Wolf, who used to have a prison ministry within the Course in Miracles community, and he had passed. And they said people were just like, "I hear you're taking over Joe Wolf's prison ministry." I'm like, "I am?" Like, these things just start happening, but once I come into this experience of miracle mindedness, or that everything's an answer to my prayer, I'm actually calling forth all this stuff, that it's like, okay, I need to start paying attention here. And so it took a few more years. I was still pretty tied into the community and didn't necessarily want to leave at the time. Um, but as things worked out, it was there. And I started a relationship with a prisoner, Dale Crow, who's a former heavyweight boxer who had been inside for about 20 years. He wrote a letter to my senior pastor, David. And as soon as I read the letter, there was just, again, this connection. So I'd started correspondence with him, and now I travel out to see him. He's in Ohio. And now, yeah, there's about 10 people in his facility that we work with. And it just seems to be growing from there.
It's fantastic. Just to go back, and I mean, and I have to ask this question because I try to look at different questions from different people. Now, we've had a lady on here, a woman on here called Virginia, who was in the cult, was in the Moonies cult in the 70s, and that was pretty drastic. Did it ever occur to you that while you're being part of an organization, because people call AA a cult, they call different things a cult, was there any sort of self edit there to sort of tell you perhaps that this was an organization that was a religious organization? I'm only asking this because I know there will be questions later on, perhaps that people might be thinking this, and that's trying to, with respect. I'm asking that with great respect.
Oh, I appreciate any question that's asked.
Yeah.
And that it didn't, I didn't have that feeling myself. Again, some of these things showed up so miraculously, and the feeling I had when I met the people, that it put beyond, the Course of Miracles, and really I think the 12 steps is all about an experience that puts an end to doubting. So the doubting part of my mind
Mm-hmm.
was actually overcome with this feeling that I had that was like, wait, this is God or the Spirit working in my life. Did I have reflections from my family and other people and
Yeah.
friends saying, hey, it's a cult? Absolutely. And I had to look at that in my mind and say, oh, okay, are these things that I believe? And so there were certain aspects, but also, so I told you I never went back to work. I was pretty successful in my life. So I had a chunk of money,
Okay.
and those types of things they didn't ask for. You know what I mean? I actually wanted to give it. The organization I was with, so I was like, hey, here's my money. And they're like, no, 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 that's too jarring for the mind. When you're unwinding from this time and space, you can't really take steps that aren't given by the Spirit. The Spirit wants to unwind us back to heaven in a slow way. It doesn't want us to like, do certain things that are, whether it's leave my family or whatever. I actually
Mm.
left the East Coast, but even with that, I went back and visited. I didn't sell my house right away. Those were things that were actually good for my mind as I went deeper into forgiveness. And so those thoughts showed up in an external form. But as far as me feeling it, I never actually had the feeling myself, just because of the love I felt in the presence of that safety, that it didn't occur to me personally. But yes, I did face the thoughts externally, especially when I got married in the community. And so, there was a lot of
Okay.
healing
So
over that.
you're saying I think what you're saying there is the outside world. So we're talking about kind of a non-duality perspective of stuff here. Is that right?
That's
Is that
correct.
your inner doubts or your inner mind was being reflected in the dream state, as it were? Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So I had to actually see that I wasn't aware of it in my, that I didn't actually have those feelings. I had a strong feeling of connection with these people. But then when, I went back home and some of the people that I cared for would say these things, I had to actually question it. Wait, do I actually believe that this is a cult? And actually, so it's all belief in my mind. I mean, that's really what A Course in Miracles is leading us to, is to question my beliefs. And so I used it all to kind of go deeper into it. So that's kind of,
Okay, so it was a case of the empire strikes back, the ego strikes back, basically, to sort of, yeah. Oh, okay. To reclaim territory. Nice. Excellent. Now, I've got James Lebowski here, and James is, I don't know if he wants to ask the question or not, but he brought up a really good point, is that A Course in Miracles has a different definition of forgiveness. Is that the case? Can you explain what that means?
sure. I mean, James, you can also add on to this, but I think what he's speaking about is forgiveness in the sense of, the Course defines it as forgiveness for what never happened. It's not talking about you've done something wrong and I'm going to forgive you for it. Is that what you mean, James?
Yeah, yeah, and I just know that I have a kind of understanding of what you're saying when you say forgiveness, but I just want to make sure that everyone
Sure.
else that there's that it's not like the course says your idea is you did something wrong and we both acknowledge you're wrong, but I'm going to let it go and be
Right.
the better person for it, and that's not what it's talking about.
Right. And so what that actually speaks to, and that's actually difficult for someone to actually just hear and say, wait, forgive me for something I've never done. And what I just mentioned, it is all about belief. So there is a belief, even I had a forgiveness from my past in recovery based in the 12 steps. And I believe it does the same thing actually for the mind. But I came to a point where an experience showed me that actually none of it actually ever happened in form. Because if we're looking at the truth of there is no past and future. It is only this moment. And that's the truth of, non-duality and the present moment and a lot of the other teachings. But what A Course in Miracles is leading us to is an experience that we come into. So to actually say, forgive them for what they have not done, is a step like beyond the mind at some point. So it kind of meets the mind where it's at. When we start the lessons, when we start the lessons in the workbook, it starts on the perceptual form. So it's actually about forgiving this glass. It literally uses things like that. Like, I think I have a meaning. So let me take a moment and see if I can put this in perspective. I don't want to get too deep into the metaphysics of the Course, because that'll be losing the heart of it.
I appreciate you trying, because I know it's difficult to do.
Yeah, well, the Course and the way it teaches is our function in heaven is creation. Our function here in this world is forgiveness. And this is actually shared. It says that our curriculum is not up to us, that we have to actually practice forgiveness. And this is actually throughout a lot of traditions, that we have to have forgiveness. Now, the question being that it's a different type of forgiveness. It's actually leading us towards a forgiveness of everything and everyone. Literally, the book says at one point, forget this world, forget this course, and come with wholly empty hands. Jesus even says you have to forgive me. And the symbol of him, it's going beyond all symbols to a state of abstraction, which is what our natural state is, but it's too fearful to approach it. So it leads us through lessons of loosening from the meaning I've given this cup. This cup is to hold water. That's actually a belief that I know something. Anything that I think I know is actually not true. Plato said, "Thus I'm the wisest man because I know nothing." And so again, it's a deep teaching about forgiving the entire world and all of the components of it. But that's hopefully that answers your question, James. I'm not sure if it fully does that or not.
I think it did a really good job. I wanted, if I could, just before I mute again, dovetail it back into the what I don't think I could have started investigating A Course in Miracles before I got into recovery, because my mind was so closed. But like you, I had a profound experience when I did the fifth step. Well, when I did the fourth step, there was a moment when all of a sudden everything went 180 degrees, because I saw myself preceding every event I'd blamed you for, and it was a total. It just completely it showed all my thinking as wrong in one moment. And I think that it also showed that my reality, as I believed it to be right up until that moment, wasn't solid. It wasn't something I could authoritatively stand behind anymore.
Mhm.
So I feel like that the forgiveness is very much about forgiving that constant creation of something that's not real. It is hard to talk about, but it is the forgiveness of that. That was my first experience with that kind of forgiveness, was forgiving the misperception I'd had right up until that moment.
Yeah.
And so that seems to happen more and more on a bunch of different levels, forgiving. And it opened the door for me to understand non-duality a little bit more.
Mhm.
Because like a lot of us, we try to explore non-duality and it gets caught up in our our dualistic thought system. And so that's kind of why I'm so interested to listen to you, because a lot of the course, I feel like I've never been a part of a community or a dialogue on the course. It's been a solo thing. And a lot of it has been caught up in a dualistic thought system. So
Mm.
as much as I should have a bunch of questions, I'm really excited to listen to somebody who was able to move through that.
Good to
Sure.
have you back, James.
Thank you.
What you share is very important, because that was my experience even through the 12 step, when I came to that point of, oh, maybe I wasn't choosing. You mean I wasn't choosing to drink or drug and all that? And so the next question that entered my mind was, maybe I'm not choosing anything. Maybe I've been wrong about everything. And so the course is very clear on, would you rather be right or happy?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the forgiveness piece comes in to a degree of, there's another part that says, the one thing essential in learning is that I know nothing. Whenever I think I'm right, I think, and it's impossible to actually be right and happy. So it's leading me to a state of contentedness and happiness that is beyond this world. And so that asks for letting go. That, it literally says that, I should resign as my own teacher. I've been poorly taught. And so it's forgiveness of that entire thought system. But what I was pointing to is that entire thought system of the wrong mind or the dream of separation created the glass and everything else. So that's why it leads us from those lessons to address the things in front of us. And then we can see where we have attachment. I can see when I scan the room in some of the lessons and I see, okay, this book means nothing. This pen means nothing. I've given the pen the meaning it has. Then I see a picture of my parents and it's like, oh, wait, no, not that. I can't. I can see where I'm making exceptions. So the Course in Miracles preface, and this is very important because it's actually a lot like the Serenity Prayer. So grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's everything. We say people, places, things in the 12-step programs. That's literally the screen, everything. And if we're talking about non-duality, the courage to change the thing I can. I don't even say things because it's my mind. I can only change my mind. I can't change anything else. And the wisdom to know the difference, which is the Holy Spirit, the right mind. And so in the Course in Miracles, in the introduction, it says, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. So if I look at this from a perspective, everything is on the screen, if we're talking in the non-dual, and
Sure.
I, the divine essence of who I am, is not. I mean, my body is, and the character of Jeffrey may seem to be on the screen, but the divine essence of who I am is not on the screen. Nothing real can be threatened. Who I actually am, my divine essence, cannot be threatened. Nothing unreal, everything on the screen, including my body and everything, exists. Herein lies the peace of God. That's where peace comes. And where I make exceptions to those rules, that's where I have to look and see where I'm valuing the valueless, where I'm valuing form over content, where I'm valuing, when we were talking about this, I said, if I lose the fact that I'm here to connect with James and all these people and you, and that it's about an outcome, I've lost my purpose. It's about that. And so that's another little explanation maybe that can bring forgiveness into a different light.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Now I'm going to go over to another panel member, Joe C. Joe, you got a question? Something you want to talk about?
Jeffrey, welcome to Here's Tom. Great to have you.
Hey, Joe.
I want to talk a little bit about the big book and your relationship with it, and also about the news about changing. Not only will there be a 5th edition big book that preserves the 164 pages exactly as is, but also a plain language big book, which won't be as Bill sees it. Someone else is going to write the narrative, right? And I don't have a horse in this race because my sobriety came to me in AA, but in a community that was one alcoholic talking to another. It took a community to sober up this alcoholic. And that's how I learned. I only really learned about the big book later in my sobriety when I moved to a town that most of the meetings were about the big book. So I don't have that strong connection to it. I don't owe my sobriety to it the way others do. And I'm just wondering how you feel about the wording being altered, the approach being altered. Do you have anything to say on that?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Joe. I appreciate that. And yeah, a similar question came up as we joined with James and I, because the Course in Miracles actually has 6 versions now. It's been retranslated in different forms and so forth. And so we had talked about that a bit, but to stay with the core of your question, I did have some help in that recovery program. But when I look back and actually see it, when I read things like Comes of Age and Language of the Heart, and I hear about book converts, I get it. I'm like, well, I could have been that. I read the book and it made so much sense that I started to have an experience as a result of reading the words. With the fact that the 164 are staying the same, I think that's great. And I don't think I don't, at least in my lifetime, that we'll see something change in that. But the stories, I believe, have to change, especially when we just went through something that we went through, and to give people a new experience with online. There's people getting online, getting sober online and doing fifth steps, never even meeting people or meeting in person. So the fact that there'll be avenues for that, gender equality, all the different stories. So I see that is, I mean, anything that can reach more people, which is really the goal of the 12 steps, seems to be good. The plain text thing, I actually work with prisoners, and I work with some guys that cannot read. I work with a guy that I've sent him a dictionary, and I have a brother who has an autistic child who cannot read. They have to read out of plain text. So there's a misconception that I see, that people think it's actually not. It's like having a Spanish translation. They're actually making a 4th edition of that. It's like having a plain text that these people that actually grew up. This one gentleman that I work with, he's been in jail for 30 years from the age of 15. He can't read, and he doesn't have someone that can walk him through it. So a plain text, who am I to say it may not work for him? There's also an option. I can just stick with the old one. If I want to buy a 2nd edition or so, I can do that. So to me, I don't try to get, caught up in it, but I do have, myself, there is something about, the way it's written. But for me, I'm also, and I'll just say this as non-judgmental as I can, I'm also a middle-aged white male that grew up in New England next to New York City. So I read that book, and I know about the stock market and those things. So it's easy for me. So I'm not a very good resource to say it should stay the same. Anyway, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Joe. It's great to see you. So, a few questions. So, if you've got any questions here, I've got a few more, but if you've got any questions for Jeffrey, whack them in chat, and I'll be getting them across. And Georgina's asked a really good one here, and it's, this is an interesting question. Thanks, Georgina. Georgina says, I'm currently working on step 3. Would it be too soon to get into the Course in Miracles?
Oh, thank you for that, Georgina. I think everything happens for a reason. And not only do I live that way, every experience I've had has proven that. So the fact that you're here today and we're talking about it means something to me. So I don't think that's a coincidence either. The 3rd step for me, as soon as I hit the 3rd step, the sponsor I worked with had me start on 85 through 88. And what 85 through 88 is 10, 11, and 12. Well, 12 goes on after 88. That's 10 and 11. But those pages are trying to get me into a practice of shifting my mind from thinking in myself to asking over and over. Just ask what we have. Here's my day. Consider my plans for the day and hand them over. So I started doing 10, 11, 12. All I see the Course in Miracles is just an extension of me trying to get in touch with my right mind or the spirit. I shared that I had experienced hearing a voice. At times I can hear that. Most of what my guidance is a strong feeling. I can feel it throughout my being, like, whoa, I'm supposed to go here. And it just comes into my mind. I know who to call, when to call them. And that's what Bill actually guarantees us in the big book. He says, your thought life will be placed on a much higher plane. And my experience, it has become part of my essence where I can feel things. I know people that are going to call before the phone rings. I'm like, oh, Joe's calling. And it's like, and now it's automatic. It's not even a surprise because it is a one mind. We are all connected. Why should I be surprised by these things? It's like, and so that becomes a thing. And so the Course in Miracles, while it can be wordy and it could be a lot, it also has a section in there. If dedication is weak, if resistance is strong, meaning if I'm not feeling to do something and dedication is weak, do not fight yourself. So try it. And if you read it and it feels heavy, put it down. You can literally open it up. A lot of people that start with it use it as an oracle. I need to, I can't figure out something. If we're still in the level of prayer, which is asking for specifics, which we all have to do at times or on the way, you just ask a question, you open it up and read a paragraph. And if it resonates, when I started, I asked questions and opened this book. I literally asked a question. It was, I can open up to the exact page that I opened it up to. And the section in here that is called the Greater Joining. And when I asked this question, I actually can't find it right now. I remember it, fortunately. I said, how can I accept the atonement for myself? And so the whole course is about accepting the atonement. And I literally asked the question, I said, how can I accept the atonement for myself? I opened up to that page and my eyes fell on that line. It says, to accept the atonement for yourself, da, 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 da. And it goes into some deeper teachings about do not, a sickness and other people and so forth. But it was like literally answering those questions that I would ask. So yeah, I say, what could it hurt? Give it a shot. When a lot of people grab the book and even when they receive it or something, they feel something with it. Like, okay, this is for me.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Georgina. And just for what it's worth, I would say try steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 as well to get you on the way to that. Definitely. So that would be my advice. But who am I to say? So now co-host Mike Stacey, I don't know if he wants to ask it. Mike, do you want to ask your question then?
Okay, sure. My name is Michael. Hi, thank you, Jeffrey. The question is that oftentimes I feel a lot of enthusiasm when I'm sharing in an AA meeting. How do I know that that's not my egoic mind rising up in order for the attention? Because I've been accused of that, and I'm just trying to discern whether or not these people that are telling me that are full of shit, or if they might be onto something there.
That's a great question. And, in the Course in Miracles, a lot of it is about discernment. How can I discern which voice am I hearing? We all face that. And that's why we practice the continuous decision-making of the third step. For me, and the Course in Miracles actually says this is, I judge by how do I feel? How does it feel that how I'm sharing? Does it feel genuine? And now, again, I've talked with a lot of people that say, well, I'm an addict or an alcoholic. Sometimes it feels good when I speak from this place, but not afterwards. So I can learn from these things. I may speak and in the moment, I might feel all charged up, but when I'm doing a 10th step that night or on the way home, I'm gonna be like, ooh, that didn't feel so good. It will occur to me. My mind is very powerful and I will start to feel that. Sometimes it's not instant. We might get all jazzed up by the ego, but it's literally, for me, it's been trial and error. And literally Bill says this, he says, whenever I have, this is whatever, 86, or if I have a thought or decision, I ask, I do not struggle. I ask him, I ask the spirit. Okay. And then I proceed to do it. I may pay for this with all sorts of absurd actions while I'm still getting tuned into this, and this is clearing the way. The 12 steps in the Course in Miracles are very similar in this way as well, that it talks about removing the obstacles to the awareness of love's presence. That's the Course terms. Getting down to cause and conditions in step, 4. And then we do 5 and 6 and 7 is removing these things so that this channel becomes clear so that I can start to tune in and I start to feel. And I'm still learning to a certain degree. It's become more refined, but that's how it works for me. I just I continue to ask, hey, is this what you would have me say? And then when I speak it, I can usually tell. It's like, oh, this is coming from the spirit. Or, even at one point when I was speaking there, I heard my mind was getting about, I said, I need to pause here. I don't want to get too metaphysical. I don't want to try to explain anything. I want to speak from the heart, and that's what Bill did so great. He was very wordy and verbose, but the language of the heart, he would always keep that. When you hear a lot of his talks, that's where he's speaking from. And when I have that prayer out front and I continue to ask, there's a prayer in here, how do I be truly helpful? And it literally says, what would you have me see? Who would you have me talk to? What would you have me say? What would you have me do? And when I keep that prayer in mind, then I have to just start trusting. And like I was saying with the 12 steps, it can start to show me with some absurd actions. I may go home and, feel like I shouldn't have shared something, and it's not that I shouldn't. I had a talk with someone today. I said, it's not that something shouldn't have happened. I'm actually getting in touch with the internal guide. I'm actually getting in touch with the spirit so I can see, oh, that's how it feels to speak from that place. And then I can start to, it's progress, not perfection, as we all know. And so we can start using it in that way. So thank you for the question.
Thanks very much, Jeffrey. That was awesome. So let's get down to a bit of the nitty gritty here. And these are the questions, the big fundamental questions that I ask everyone who comes on. in your exploration in A Course in Miracles, and the things that you've discovered, or the awakenings and the enlightenment, the epiphanies that you've experienced, what is reality? What is this? You mentioned before about in the dream, and that sounds very much like Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta and all the great sort of Eastern sages. What is this dream that we're in? What is this reality?
So I've had moments, and even the Bible and a lot of the different texts say it's a peace that surpasses all understanding. And it's actually beyond explanation when we feel those things. And so, as far as reality, the way that, I had an experience and I shared, it's impossible to transmit. In fact, the Course says revelatory is highly personal and a direct experience from God to the seeming person, but it can't be transmitted. Vision can be transmitted. I can see others with the vision of Christ, but as far as transmitting that, it can't be transmitted because it's a highly personal thing. And it actually says that an experience will come to every one of us that is beyond all doubting. And that experience is a glimpse of the end, not that there's an end, but that's a glimpse of what we call reality. The Course calls the happy dream, which you can be in this world and not of it. And the happy dream is like the fourth dimension that Bill talks about. Eckhart Tolle calls it the now, being in the now. Well, being beyond time, being the I am, that reality. Our reality is oneness, is grace. Spirit is in a state of grace forever. My reality is only spirit. Therefore, I am in a state of grace forever. I'm dreaming that I'm here, having an experience because of my beliefs, my belief that I separated from God, the belief in guilt. So as I wash my mind of those beliefs, I start to have a lighter experience. I start to feel enlightened. I start to see love in others. I start to see the Christ in others. And that becomes my experience as I approach reality. And the last step is taken by God. God restores us to sanity, if you will, and of the oneness. That's not our job. But, another thing that, a lot of the different traditions and stuff talk about what it is, what it isn't. And the Course actually addresses where it says a universal theology is impossible. But a universal experience is not only possible, it's inevitable that we all find our way home with. And the Course speaks that it's already happened, that this is all just playing out. And so that's kind of the best I can do.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I mean, this is a little bit out there, but are we living in a hologram? Is it some sort of quantum hologram that we're existing in, and there is a reality in there or out there that we aren't aware of?
So the hologram, there's a lot of discussions about computer simulation and that.
Yeah.
But a hologram is a good example of the way the ego, we're seeing through a filter, a lens of the ego. We're seeing a world based on our own beliefs. But beyond that is reality. So reality is beyond what we see is not reality. And that's what the Course teaches. And again, I can speak from a place that I actually had this revelatory experience when I came back. I was like, this isn't real. I literally was telling people at the facility, I'm like, this has already happened. It's over. This is before I found the Course. I'm like literally explaining all the things, writing the stuff down because I had that profound experience. But when I came back, after some time, the mind rushes back to it. We have an addiction to guilt, to darkness, really, because we don't want to face the belief in the mind that we separated from God because it's traumatic. So it gets spread out into resentments and relationship and this. So the Course in Miracles and the 12 steps are paths of relationships, of healing through relationships to bring us closer to our Creator, closer to who we are, the Son of God. I'm the Son of God, and so is everyone else. And as we heal the mind, we start to approach that. And then, like I said, it brings us towards an experience that will end all doubting. And that's what revelation is it shows us, if you will, the end, which is eternal, but it shows us that so that when we come back, the mind comes back to this experience and it's jarring. Even ones I know that I would consider to be more towards mastery, which takes a long time of seemingly practice and mind training, but they've had experiences and they say they share the same thing, that coming back is jarring to this. So
we are all the Christ mind, I think is what you're saying. And but we've forgotten that we were. Is that kind of right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We
And
have
part
to-
of that healing process is the forgiveness and yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got you. Okay, so we've got some really good questions here, and Crystal's asked a beauty. Would you relate the step 10 inventory to a conviction from the Holy Spirit?
To a conviction of the Holy Spirit. Could you explain that a little more? Maybe I don't
Crystal,
understand.
do you want to come in quickly? We're in the last 10 minutes, so if you want to come in quick, Crystal.
Yeah, sorry. I was going back to what Michael had asked earlier about when we were talking about how if we would know when we are speaking or sharing, if it's coming from a place of ego or if like the Holy Spirit, basically we would know because of a conviction from the Holy Spirit, right? So I was kind of saying like if we go back to step 10 and kind of realize it like after.
Yeah. I think I feel the core of what you're saying. And, that's also what I believe, the 12 steps, of Course in Miracles, it's all the same, showing us the same thing, is know thyself, and so that's what the 10th step does for me. Every night, every morning, I am highly devoted to my practice because I like the the results it produces. This morning, I woke up and I wrote out excitements, desires, fears. I write them out so that I can't be controlled by them. So that's me knowing myself. And it's the same thing with the 10th step at night when we take that, end of the day thing, or in the moment. It can be the spot check where we take this and we're checking in to see where the motives are. And that is actually what brings us into a closer discernment to see when I'm actually aware that I'm excited for this to happen today or this, when I have that in my awareness, then I'm looking at, it can't take me over during the day, so that now I can hear that voice or I feel confident. Anticipation plays no part. That present confidence of the spirit is there because I'm not being run by these older patterns. And that's what I see the 10th and this other step is a degree of knowing thyself so that I can have a higher degree of discernment in those moments.
That's fantastic. Now I'm just got a friend of mine in Brisbane, Australia, who's got up very early to speak to you, Jeffrey. Joe S, would you do you want to ask a question? I know you've got an interesting one.
Yeah, cheers, David. I've been listening to what you're saying, and I understand that feeling that you have. And I wrote a message to a friend, and then he said you should ask it. I understand, but I can't explain. Is this the atonement? That's the question.
Say it one more time, Joseph.
I understand, but I can't explain. Is this the atonement?
Is this the atonement?
So the inverted commas is I can't explain. Is that right, Joe? So it's the phrase. Yeah. Is that atonement? So what's the phrase again?
I understand what he's what he's saying and all of this stuff, but I can't explain it. I can't verbalize it. Mm-hmm. I can't explain it.
Sure.
Is this the atonement? Is this part of the forgiveness, the complete surrender? Sure. Is this part of it?
Mystery.
I would say I feel what you're saying now, and I think yes, it's back to this I don't know, and having that as part of it is the gateway to the atonement. The atonement, another word for the atonement, is the correction. And it's a correction of the belief in separation. So there's a deep belief way down in the mind that is salvation. And the correction is that it never happened. But I'm actually creating a world, believing I'm controlling and doing all these things that are actually creating, it's a thought system of control. And so the more I can withdraw from that and be in the I can't explain anything, that's when the mind starts to open to mystical experience, to abstraction, so that you start to have these experiences that show what David was talking about, reality, so that the correction dawns on the mind. Atonement is what we're trying to go for, which is the correction of the belief that we separated from God. We are all one.
It's like we're on a path to a place that we already are.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
That's it.
Thanks.
You nailed it.
Joe. Look at him all rugged up there in Queensland. Unbelievable, isn't it? In subtropical Queensland, he's got all his beanie on. My God. Hey, also, just Ruth's asked a really good question. Where can she find more information to study this on her own? Is there a website for it that she could go that you would recommend? And we'll get your contact details if that's okay later at the end of it. But any sources that you'd recommend? Where should we buy it, etc.?
Yeah. The book itself can be raw. Maybe I give you my contact information so that anyone's interested, they can contact me and I can give some support material as well. The version that I read is from the Foundation of Inner Peace, which was the first one of the first editions that has the workbook and everything right in there. So the Foundation for Inner Peace is in, I think it's Temecula. It's up in north of San Francisco, but there's a lot of resources that I could share with you. Certainly, even some other books that help. There's a book. A lot of people that just start off, there's a book that Gary Renard wrote called The Disappearance of the Universe. And that really answers that question, actually, that James was asking about forgiveness and what does the Course mean by forgiveness. It is addressed so well in there, as it's a dialogue type of book. You have to have an open mind to read it, because he literally has two entities sitting on his couch that are speaking to him.
Oh, right.
But it's really beautiful. All the stuff that he says in there like resonates on such a deep core. So that's a beautiful book to get started, that a lot of people read before they read the Course, so that when they read the Course, it starts making sense instantly. There's not a lot of this, trying to get around the words.
And I think Sherry, who comes here, has put in chat that meetup.com has multiple Zoom classes where you can look up if you wanted to get into A Course in Miracles. And just for the record, what's your website, Jeffrey? Where can people contact you? Because I don't actually have your contact details. So if you read it out here for posterity.
It's last-step.org. That's my prison ministry website, which you can contact me on there.
Okay, fantastic. A few more questions from me. So you have experienced ego death?
Sure, and ego return.
Oh, okay.
which was
Where are you today?
Death, actually.
You dug it up. Did you dig it up again? It's a zombie, is it? Yeah.
Well, actually, what you say, the nights leading up, I had a couple of very dark nights of the soul leading up to those experiences I shared about that were like pretty intense, but it wasn't as bad as the fall. It's literally what the Bible calls the fall. So when I had this revelatory experience, I had to come back to, I think I have an identity crisis. I think I'm Jeffrey Cosker from,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but when I fell back into this belief system, that was actually jarring. That was like, it was like going through every nightmare I ever had. And, I have a tattoo on my back, several, and two of them is one give me vision. God, grant me the vision. And on the other side, it says the strength. And I believe those prayers were answered in that experience. I had a vision of God and then the strength to return, because let me tell you, the egos want you to kill yourself. And, it's throwing all the gauntlet at you, all the worst thoughts that could pass through the mind. Fortunately, I had the experience to see these aren't my thoughts. Like, these never were my thoughts. These are just thoughts that are out there trying to drag me away from my peace. So, yeah, so that part was the worst part.
And with all your work that you've done, do you see the world differently to the rest of us? I've heard of different, you mentioned the word mystical, and I love that, and people who are mystics and stuff. Are you a mystic, and do you see the world in a different way than we do?
I have my days like everyone else.
Okay.
My life is devoted to purpose. So I don't work a normal job. I don't do those types of things. Everything I do is for the purpose of forgiveness. So my experience may be somewhat different than yours, because I don't look at things the same. I have days where I would say they're quite mystical, or, the Course talks about, miracle mindedness. I'm more still, I practice my mind training very deeply, and I have miracle mindedness. Mastery is what the Christ had. And there are people, I'm sure, that are walking the earth that have it, where the subject object split has broken down. That hasn't happened for me. I have my moments, but when the subject object split breaks down, I'm still probably between, I go from the victim world, which is it's happening to me, which I'm done with, to it's happening for me, which I'm done with. it's happening from me. Well, the final is by me. And that's when the subject object split breaks down and there is no separation. It's not even a thought of external. And I'm not there yet. I still have some healing to do. And as the mind heals, that's what I was saying, we approach the happy dream, or, that's another explanation of the subject object split breaking down.
Okay. And what about, so I guess the one question that we haven't asked that we always ask everyone who comes on, and everyone has a different thing. What is God? Who is God? What the hell is it?
I just spoke to a guy that was in prison for 40 years, and I said it, and it came from the Course, and it's the best explanation I've ever heard. God is, period. Everything after that, and I cease to speak. If I say anything after that, I've lost the point, and I certainly don't know. I am, like I said, I'm practicing, and I've had my experiences, and I could share all the words that you've heard before, but the best way for me to maintain that state of mind is God is, period. I actually just put a post up on my website with that title. So that's what comes to me at this moment.
Okay, so I'm going to wind it up now. Just a reminder to everyone is that we are on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. Here's Tom with the weather. We also, it's a free podcast is this. We just pay for the podcast and the Zoom account. So if you've got a few spare bucks, pounds, shekels, dimes, whatever, penneth, then send them our way to PayPal, which is gillwriter.co.uk. gillwriter@hotmail.co.uk, and we'd be very grateful for any spare loose change you got down the back of your sofa. That's all we need, really, and that's great. And just to say, we're also on YouTube, where you'll be able to find this on YouTube as well as on Spotify and iTunes. Final question for you, Jeffrey, and this has just been an awesome, another awesome episode. So thank you so much for this. And this is the final question. Now, I'm gonna put a little bit of so a condition on this question that we always ask. Everyone knows what's going to come, but I'd ask you just not to say the big book or A Course in Miracles. Okay, that's those. You haven't got those two with you. Okay, so here we go. So you've won the lottery or the lotto, whatever it is that you got in Nevada. You've won $1 billion. You are rich. You give half of it away to charity, but you think you're going to treat yourself. So you set off from the nearest port to Nevada in a super yacht that you've bought, and this is like, makes the Titanic look like a sailing boat. This is a fantastic yacht. It's got all the mod cons. It's got a dozen rooms. You've taken your wife and your children and your friends and all your buddies, and you can have like your own little 12-step meetings all over the place, and you can read to your heart's content, and you set sail and you're cruising down the Pacific in the sunshine, tropical paradise all around you, beautiful blue water. But unfortunately, you strike a coral reef and the ship starts to sink very quickly. All you've got time is to chuck all your mates overboard. They swim to a nearby deserted island. All you've got time is to run down to your bookcase with a plastic bag, find your favorite book that isn't the big book, or it isn't A Course in Miracles, throw it into the bag, dive overboard, swim to this deserted isle with your friends, and await rescue. Well, all you've got to read is this book. What's the book? Who's it by? And why?
Grab it, because I keep it right here.
Oh, here we go.
Right here I have A Course in Miracles, my big book, and my other blue book.
Oh.
The Sermon on the Mount by Emmett Fox.
Ah, okay. Why?
I think Emmett, he wrote that book in 1939. I think he would be a Course in Miracles student today. I think a lot of the stuff that Bill wrote was pretty inspired by that. And it's just, it's something near and dear to my heart. I read it pretty early on in sobriety, and every time I read it, I get something more. Because I was raised in a Catholic house, and I went to Catholic school. So I had to heal a lot of my associations with certainly the names Jesus and the Bible and all those different things. And this book just speaks to me in that way, where I have a reinterpretation of that entire teaching, the Beatitudes, the Our Father, all those things that I really needed another interpretation for, and continue to. So that's what that book does for me.
Yeah, I think we've had that book a couple of times. So thank you very much. Now, I would just ask you if you wanted to hang around for around 15, 20 minutes after, because I'm sure there's going to be a few people there that have a few questions or a few things they'd like to say to you. I'm sure it's all going to be good. And just to say, next week we've got a special thing. We've got we're going to have a Buddhist boxing match. So we've got two hot rockin' Buddhists who are going to come on and debate the validity of the 12 steps. It's going to be a real good one. So get your ringside seat. That'll be the same time next Friday. I'm sure Joe C is going to be up for that, and Lebowski and Mike Stacey as well. We all love a good punch up. Fantastic. So thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you next week. And this has been Here's Tom with the Weather. Great episode. Thanks, everyone.